afternoon, everybody. Many of you in your earlier years here at JCOS will have either learned in your Jewish education lessons about inspiring leaders. Many of you will have, on the Israel trip, visited David Ben-Gurion's grave or learned about the people who created the modern state of Israel, and probably would have been told that those people were 17 or 18 when they made those unbelievable changes to the world in which we live. The majority of you would have been involved in the Yoni Jesna Award, and many of you, no doubt, have done fantastic things in your lives. The theme this year of Rosh Chodesh for year 10 and 11 is meeting young, inspiring leaders. And we know from our studies and from our experiences that those inspiring young leaders can make a difference that is beyond our expectations. I'm absolutely thrilled and feel really honored to be introducing Matt to you today. Matt Anisfeld is probably the inspiration behind the JCOS minibuses that were driven down to Calais over the Festival of Sukkot to take all those fabulous clothes and bags and things that we collected as a school down to Calais. Matt probably had an idea that he thought was pretty crazy, and actually that idea became a reality. And we're here today, or he's here today, to share with us his experience of driving down to Calais, what they did for the refugees and the asylum seekers that are at the borders, and really to share some of those experiences with us. So we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you here today, and this is Matt Anisfeld.
Thank you for that really nice, warm welcome. And thank you so much for having me in your school. It's such a lovely and amazing building, and I've never actually been here before. But I'm very excited about pluralistic and progressive Judaism, and I think this is an amazing thing that that Britain has and the British Jewish community has. So yeah, I'm Matt Anisfeld, and I work for an organisation called Marom, which is Masorti Young Adults. Masorti Judaism is one of the smallest sects of Judaism in the world and in Britain, but the idea behind it is, just for those of you who don't know, it's a halakhic Judaism, so it believes that Jewish law is binding in a sense, so it believes that we have to do what Jewish law says, but it also believes that halakha changes and that halakha has always changed, so we're interested in progress through halakha. So we've legalised, within the Masorti community, we've legalised gay marriage, and also there's a sort of egalitarianism that pervades throughout all of everything that we do. So that's Masorti. Marom is the young adults branch of Masorti, and it's broken into two sections. There's the student section, and then there's the young adults section, which is for everyone who's sort of post-student age. And I run that second part. And I've been doing that since September, and in September, that was just about when this crisis in Calais was beginning to hit the media. And for those of you who don't know, what's going on in Calais at the moment is there's a refugee camp. So it's filled with people who have come from countries all over the world where they're fleeing oppression. So, for example, in Syria, where there's a horrible dictator, tyrannical dictator, and then there's also ISIS who's controlling a lot of the country. A lot of people have managed to escape from there and are fleeing for their lives and with their families often. And a lot of people, although mostly men, have managed to make it the whole way across Europe into this Calais refugee camp. And there are people from all over the world there who are fleeing different oppressive regimes. But the vast majority of them, I'd say about 98% of them, are men, and then the rest are women and children. And the reason, and most of the men actually are between the age of 15 and 30. And the reason for that is it's just so difficult to make the journey the whole way across Europe, crossing through so many borders, and not having any source of income or source of food to eat and nowhere to live. So the people that have managed to make it all the way to Calais are really are mostly just men between the ages of 15 and 30 who don't have to look after kids to the same extent that a lot of women do, and they're not children, and children would have found the journey much harder for obvious reasons as well. So we had the idea that we were going to go to Calais as Maron over Sukkot, over Chol HaMoed, which are the middle days of Sukkot. And the reason for that was it just seemed so fitting in what the idea of Sukkot was and is. So Sukkot is the time in the Jewish calendar where we remember the time when we were leaving Egypt from an oppressed land in Egypt where we were treated as slaves and treated horribly and physically and psychologically oppressed for years and years. And then we managed to escape Egypt through the parting of the Red Sea, and we found ourselves in the wilderness. And we build Sukkot, we build sukkahs, to remember. It's a bit confusing because the name of the festival is also the name of the hut. But we build huts, which are called Sukkot, in order to remember and to empathise with that time in our history when we were when we were basically refugees, when we were fleeing for our lives from Egypt, and we didn't know where our next meal was coming from, and we didn't know where we were going to live, or if we were going to be safe from nature, from rain and other things in nature, and the cold. So what we decided to do was, over the course of Sukkot, we were going to go to Calais and try and help out in the refugee camp, because it seemed in the spirit of Sukkot that Sukkot's the time when you remember refugees, and so when there's refugees on our doorstep in Calais, which is only about a 2.5 hour drive from here if you go on the Eurotunnel, we decided that we were called by the festival of Sukkot and by our responsibility, having come from a position of refugees, to go and help out in Calais. And there's another way also in which we're responsible for refugees, and we're taught to empathise with refugees as Jews. And it's because basically the whole of our history we've been escaping persecution. Most recently, I'm sure lots and lots of your grandparents in this room weren't born in England and escaped Eastern Europe and escaped Germany. Can anyone put their hand up in this room if they know that their grandparents aren't born in England? Yeah, so quite a lot of you have grandparents who aren't born in England, and I think if you go back to another generation, then almost none of your parents' grandparents would have been born in England. So not just through the narrative of the Torah, where we left Egypt and were escaping the oppression of Egypt, but all throughout our history, through the Spanish Inquisition and through the Holocaust and through the Crusades, we've been escaping all sorts of persecution, and we really are, in our DNA, at our very core, we are nomadic people, we are refugees. So what we did there were three main things that we were doing there. So thank you very much for lending us your minibus and for collecting so many donations. The first thing that we did was we were at a warehouse in Calais that had been set up as a central point to collect all of the resources, and we helped sort out all of these resources, so coats and sleeping bags and tents and sleeping mats and boots and all sorts of things. There was a problem in September, which was where in the media there was a lot of concern about refugees, and a lot of people made the journey over to Calais not really knowing that there wasn't any level of organisation in the refugee camp, and they would just dump their resources on the floor of the refugee camp and leave. And that led to a lot of rioting around the resources, and it wasn't good. A lot of the resources went to waste. So some people set up some warehouses where they collected all of the resources, and volunteers have been going across there. Some just for a day, some for months. Some have decided that they're going to spend the rest of the year there. Some have said they're going to spend an entire year there just sorting out resources so that the refugees, and the increasing number of refugees coming from places like Syria and Iraq, as well as other places, have things that they can wear and things that they can sleep in. The second thing that we did, which I didn't actually do, but a lot of people in the group did, was just simply pick up litter on the site. And it's a very, very humbling experience to go and just for hours and hours pick up litter. And it really makes you empathise with people who are in jobs that I suspect very few people in the Jewish community have, which is things like rubbish collection and things like litter picking. It's really very humbling indeed to be bending over, picking up bits of litter, and just knowing that the reason that you're doing that is because to make the refugee camp a cleaner place and a better place to live in. It's a very humbling experience indeed. The third thing that we did there was we built shelters, which is very, very much in line with Sukkot, where probably the central mitzvah of Sukkot is to build Sukkot and live in them. And we do that to remember the time when we were refugees in the wilderness and we had to build Sukkot for ourselves. And now these people are in exactly the same situation where they're escaping tyrannical and oppressive regimes. And so they've gone and so they've made their way over to Calais, and now they need these temporary dwellings in order to live in. So we helped them build that. The camp itself was strikingly similar to the description in the Torah of Jews in the wilderness for, I think, 4 reasons, but I'm still trying to think of some more reasons because I'm sure there were. The first thing is that the camp is very tribal in its layout. So it's divided into areas. There's one area which is full of Iraqi refugees. There's one area that's full of Syrian refugees. There's one area that's full of Eritrean refugees. There's Ethiopian refugees. And there's refugees from all over the world, from different oppressive regimes, but they very much stayed in their separate factions throughout the camp. And that's just like the description of how the Jews travelled through the deserts, where each of the tribes, so the 12 sons of Jacob, and the tribes that descended from them, were split up in the camp in that very tribal fashion. I don't really know what to make of that, but I just found it very particularly striking and very, very similar to the description of the Torah. The second thing was that the whole camp is centred around religious buildings. So like the camp that we set up when we were travelling through the wilderness, where we had the Mishkan, which was the travelling temple at the centre of what we were doing. At the centre of this refugee camp, while there's a lot of sort of hustle and bustle around the camp, in the centre there's a very peaceful space where the refugees have built this enormous church. It's as big as any church on a high street here, but they built it out of planks of wood and tarpaulin and whatever resources they could find. And it's an incredibly beautiful building. And then there's also some mosques around that area as well. And there's a sense of spirituality and peacefulness at the centre of the camp that is unlike the outside of the camp. And again, that just seems very, very similar to the description in the Torah of the Jews in the wilderness. The third thing that's strikingly similar is the shelters. When you look at them, they are these 4-sided buildings with flat roofs, and they've got tarpaulin around the outside often, and sometimes they've got bits of wood around the outside, and you just look at them and you just think, these are Sukkot. There's no two ways about it. In a way, they just look like they've been bought from Sukkot in Golders Green, but obviously they haven't. But that similarity is really striking. And in fact, when we were there, we were thinking that we build these symbolic Sukkot during the festival of Sukkot, but actually they are representing the shelters that we built when we were refugees in travelling through the wilderness. And in many ways, the Sukkot, these shelters that we were building for them, are more like the original Sukkot than the Sukkot that we built on the festival of Sukkot, that are more symbolic. So that was amazing. The final thing that was strikingly similar was that a lot of the refugees talk about Britain and talk about Germany as if it's some kind of promised land. They talk about it as if the good life is there, and they're escaping the horrible tyranny of the places that they're coming from, and they're going to this place, this land where they're going to lead a good life, and they're going to lead a life where they don't have to be afraid for their lives and afraid for where their next meal is going to be coming from. So those four similarities are amazing. And I think the message that I'd like to share with you all is that throughout the Torah, we're called on to love the stranger over and over again. I think more than 40 times we're called on to love the stranger. And the reason it says is because we were once strangers in the land of Egypt, which is a very weird thing, actually, if you think about it, because we're even told to love Egyptians because we were once strangers in their land, which is quite odd, because you think in a way that we should resent the Egyptians. Obviously, this is a mythological Egypt rather than present day Egypt that we're talking about, but it's very odd that the Torah calls on us to love all strangers when they're in our land, because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. And actually, as the trip went on, the more and more we thought about it, the more we realised that Jews, in every part of our narrative, in the Torah and throughout the rest of Jewish history, we've been escaping persecution, and we found ourselves as refugees. In the Masorti community, someone's probably going to get upset with me for saying this, but in the Masorti community, it can often feel like we're sort of fudging Judaism a bit. That we're really uncomfortable with the idea that there's gay people are not treated well, and we want to find a Jewish halakhic solution to that problem. And it can often feel like the solution to that problem is a bit of a fudge. I think that it's compellingly argued often, but it can often feel like it's a bit shaky, and a lot of the Orthodox community don't respect those halakhic rulings. But the more and more we thought about it, the more we realised that thinking about Jews as refugees isn't at all a fudge. It's just who we are. If you're not reading the Jewish history as a history of escaping persecution and fleeing for our lives from persecution and trying to make a better life for ourselves, then you're misreading the Jewish tradition. So the message is that when we see suffering in the world, and we've got suffering in our narrative, then we have to engage with the suffering in our narrative and use it as a tool to empathise with the suffering that's going on in the world. So in the case of Calais, we engaged with the suffering in our history of refugees. I suppose over Pesach we could engage with the suffering of slavery that we experienced in Egypt. And we can use that story, and we can use that history of ours, and we can use that narrative that's core to who we are and core to our Jewish identities to think about suffering that's going on in the world and try to make the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Well, the first thing that I want to say is wow. As I said, Matt probably thought he had a bit of a crazy idea, but the idea really came into fruition. And what we want to encourage you to do, and what we would like to inspire you to do, is have some of those ideas. Think out of the box. Think about the inspiring leaders that you're going to be exposed to over the coming year, and think about what sort of leader you can also be. Rosh Chodesh is a time for renewal. It's a time for reflection, it's a time for many people for prayer, and we really hope that we are giving you the opportunities to reflect and to pray and to renew yourselves and your souls, and for you to think about the impact that you will have and can have in the world. As Matt said, the things that we do can change the world. The things that we can do can heal the world. And that is what we hope and wish and pray for youth to be doing in the world, is that we all together make the world a better place.